I'm Andrew Chigdell. I'm not usually over here in Wallace Hall. I'm in the University Center for Human Values and the Philosophy and Religion departments. But I also helped to coordinate the Princeton Food Project together with Tessa Desmond and Rubenstein and some colleagues here, Gina Tall. And so we're co-sponsoring along with C-PREE this talk today. We're very happy to have a chance to do that. Our speaker, Austin Frerick, has come to us from Brooklyn, but is at Yale and works there as a fellow in the Thurman Arnold Project in the School of Management. He has degrees from Grinnell and University of Wisconsin-Madison, originally from Iowa, is that right? And has written this book, a first book effort that is apparently doing really, really well. Just some of the quotations in the the blurbs in the book or in the press kit are pretty amazing. So it's been chosen as one of the outstanding academic titles of the year. Bleeding Heartland says, some may herald Barron's as an overdue update of The Jungle, the 1906 book by Upton Sinclair. Marion Nestle, some of you may know as this, she wrote this book called Food Politics, and is probably the person to ask about what books on food and corporate politics are worth looking at. She says, wow, this is one important book. If you want to know how corporations control the food supply, start here. So I would have said start with Marion Nestle's book, and Marion Nestle says start with Austin's book. So there are lots and lots of impressive people recommending the book. There are a few extra copies. It's also available for sale in lots of places. And Austin's just going to sort of introduce us to the main themes of the book. Hope you'll join me in welcoming him.
So before I get going, so in college we taught thesis, evidence. What I realize is people need story. They need narratives. So my book profiles different robber barons in the food system, but they're really narrative devices to tell structural stories. So think of it like hiding the vegetable. So we're going to talk about Cargill today. That's going to be one of my barons. Cargill is the largest private company in America. They're bigger than the Cokes. But really, they're my grain baron, and that chapter is really about the farm bill, though. So as you read the book, you'll kind of notice that's kind of what I'm doing, but it's also, I had fun with this, is I'm mixing up the narratives. Like, it's not the same, for example, my hog baron, I think of it as my trashy Florida new money. And then Cargill, my more aristocratic, Greenwich, you don't even need, but you want to change up the stories. It's because, in the day, we're emotional creatures. Also, the weirdest thing about doing this book, too, is people tell me about all the barons I've missed. So I have a whole folder on my Dropbox called Purgatory, where it's put into these different barons. So I actually just added Cisco. Cisco's in my paperback. I talk fast, and I've been doing a lot of nursing homes in Iowa. I want to show you a few of these slides. So when I first started doing this, I realized in the back of most people's minds is, I'm asking you to pay more for food. Here's the thing. So Americans actually spend more money in food than most of our Western peers. Person, we spend $3,694. That's more in Canada, Greece, Japan, Germany, and we're about dollar for Italy. Anyone that's been to Italy knows what a dollar gets you there is very different than a dollar here. Indulge me for a nerd moment. If industry smart, what they tend to say is as percent of income, Americans spend the least amount of money possible. That's factually true. That's at 6.8%. I do not think you can use that metric because we live in a have-not society. We have one of the most unequal Gini coefficients in the world. What matters at the bottom half of Americans is the per pupil expenditure, $3,000. This is a really good research example because my first job is at the Congressional Research Service in DC, which is like a Library of Congress thing. And USDA will always frame things up pro-industry way. They will frame in a different story. Here's the thing, we shouldn't be shocked. I think the most concentrated markets in America are food markets. Concentrated markets gouge, that's what they do. There's this great Bloomberg story from a few years ago. The journalist did a cute little thing where every protein in America is under investigation for price fixing except turkey. We're talking tuna and salmon, and then 2 weeks later turkey was under investigation. Because when these markets are cartels, it's really easy to act like a cartel. On top of it, food's local. So even when we talk about these markets, we tend to use national figures. You're not going to take milk from New Mexico and sell it in Maine. And so I had this dairy guy in Wisconsin present a paper a few years ago where he estimated one company in New England has an 85% market share of milk. And I would eat occasionally any ounce. Those people are not paying a fair price for milk in those markets. Also, I love this chart right here because, so this is what bacon costs in America, adjusted for inflation. We'll talk more in a second. Basically, in the 90s is when bacon industrialized. Factory farms came on the scene, and you see a collapse in price. Then what you see since then essentially returned to what it was pre-industrialization, pre-corporatization. And the reason why I say this is usually when these tends to happen in these moments is think of it like Uber. You know, Uber was cheap 5 years ago, now it's not. That's what happens in these moments. A massive consolidation is to get dominant market share. They flood the market of capital, they drop the price, get people hooked, they drive out the old production model, and then they raise their prices to market climbs. And also, the thing to keep in mind, the scary thing is, historically, if you wanted to act like a cartel, you used to get together like a Holiday Inn by the interstate. Now you can essentially do it with third-party data brokers. So this is, Agristas is a big one in meat production. Here's all the meat companies as a world, and they basically aggregate the meat data to allow essentially to help with price fixing. So in chicken, all the chicken companies, they share how many little, they call them pellets, like baby chicken's called pellets or something. They basically share all that information so you can forecast out the market. This is, the legality of this is up in the air, but this is actually rampant in the American economy right now. Like, you might have heard about it with apartments. A lot of landlords in large cities are doing essentially this. It's a playbook of private equity. And the other thing too is, I love this chart because you know that phrase, a picture says 1,000 words? This is the nerdy version. So the blue graph, the blue lines mean what you pay to sort for feed. The red is what the rancher pay. That divergence you see post 2015, that is monopoly captured. You'll notice it's the highest in early COVID, like March 2021, the gap gets massive. It's tightened a little bit because essentially the cattle herd in America is collapsing. We're at 1950 levels. There's various reasons for it. It has to do with the climate crisis. But the thing to keep in mind here is the year ago, McDonald's filed lawsuits against the beef packers for price fixing. McDonald's is the largest buyer of beef. In most lines of business, you treat your largest customer the best way possible. So it says something when even McDonald's feels like it's being shortchanged. And the other thing too, what I realized writing this book is, how do I say this? Is as we privatize our land grants, as we privatize our land grants, private money to fill that void, using the capture to certain academic disciplines. Kate Cumla, she's a journalist turned antitrust lawyer, who wrote this paper I really recommend there's this great documentary called Inside Job, how the Great Recession happened. And one of the things they discovered were banks were essentially financing the economic literature just by deregulation. So what we did in response after was have disclosure policies, academic journals. If you're taking money from Bank of America, just tell me you're taking money. What Kate documents is agriculture economics, no one's enforcing that. She highlights a certain academic who brags about on his website all the corporate money he's taking. He's an editor of a journal, he doesn't enforce his own disclosure policy, and then he goes on NPR and tells you you're not being gouged. This really corrupts the ecosystem. Generally speaking, my personal opinion is these universities really don't care. They care about how much money you bring in. And also, the thing to keep in mind here too is the system makes bad tasting food. Especially meat and dairy, inputs really matter. A year ago, the New York Times stated that they rated all the butters, and they rated Kerrygold number 1. Kerrygold's really big. Here's the thing, that's Irish butter. That's just the way we used to do butter production in America. You know, it's just cows eating grass. Now most fun little fact, there's 3 times more dairy done in New Mexico than Vermont now. Which, just think about that. You think a cow is Vermont, but there's way more dairy. It's these industrial feedlots, cows are fed corn, they live in the desert, they make a BAP product. Yeah.
You check your mic system the other day. It's where Wizard will play back. YouTube. True. Reach to the colored button should be.
Okay, got a linking. Get to.
They both look.
Yeah. Okay. There. So let me tell you about my first bearing. This is my hog bearing. This is the whole bearing that started this whole thing. I was at a dive bar in Iowa, Des Moines. And this is 2018, and I didn't know at the time. Iowa does have campaign contributions limits. And this person was telling me one hog farmer donated $300,000 to the governor of Iowa. Not only that, what got me was they had a private jet with the words allegedly on it when pigs fly. First of all, that's a beautiful image. That's good copy. And it's also, for me, I was intellectually curious. What happened to Iowa in my lifetime? I used to drive and see animals when I was little, now I don't. And as I tell you this chapter, keep in mind here how much I'm so shaped by Iowa. Like, Iowa is canary in the coal mine for America, for the food system. Iowa has the second highest cancer rate in America. Iowa has a water crisis. Iowa has an obesity crisis. Iowa should be Tuscany in North America, but in fact, come to do 5 million hogs in my lifetime. Sorry, I just have the clicker down. Oh, here. All right, so I first did this king and fox, this whole piece. This is where it started. So this is a modern hog production facility. It's just these large metal sheds, stuffed with full of pigs. Outside, most of them are usually as dumpsters because about 10% of pigs die inside these facilities. This is one of my hog bearings operations. This is a very joke to make in New Jersey. That should be, like I said, the Tuscany, but this to me looks like the New Jersey Turnpike. He's just dead. Like, look how dead that landscape is. And on top of it, this is my hog barons. This is their office, their farm. First of all, what is a farm? It's kind of down there in my book. Like, that looks like a dentist clinic to me. And if anyone knows Iowa, this is like suburban rich Des Moines. And then, so here's the thing is, their whole operation is in Iowa. They're in like 60% of the counties. Step back for a second. I kind of blame this whole thing on chicken. A century ago, when we wrote regulations, fixed meat industry, in response to the jungle, we didn't write chicken to the regulation. It's because there weren't commercial chicken slaughterhouses. You just had a chicken in your backyard, you kill it. So what happened down south where corporations took that exploited model to black farmers and sharecropping and applied it to chicken. So to this day in America, 70% of chicken farmers live in poverty. You do not own your animal, you take on a ton of debt, you're told what to feed, there's a whole tournament way you're paid, it's really exploitive. What happened in the food system is chickens are getting a lot of market share, and here's the thing, USA could have stepped in and be like, no chicken, you gotta behave like the other meats. But instead, USDA allowed a race to the hog. They call this process chickenization. Hogs chickenized. And they first chickenized actually in North Carolina. If anyone from North Carolina, the Eastern Shore, a state senator wrote the regulations that he then exploited it. And that he did it in the poor black areas. And to me, this is the best example of structural racism system. Because in Iowa, hogs are manure factories. A hog defecates 2.5 times more than you. So Iowa's 25 million hogs. That's the manure combined. In Iowa, you do underneath these metal sheds you saw is a big lagoon, and what they do is they drain it every few months and they inject it into the soil. In North Carolina, because of the water table, they have to spray it into the air. So in the poor black areas, they're spraying, pardon my French, hog shit everywhere. So you have poor black churches have repaint their steeples every few years because they turn brown. What happened though, and I tell this story, is part of the reason why I love doing this chapter was we were told this happened because this was the most efficient thing. That is not true. This is a story of regulatory capture. This is what this chapter is, and that's why I showed you the price of bacon. And what you saw is the elite of Iowa freaked out because they saw what North Carolina was doing, and they wanted to be the #1 hog state, the #1 corn seed, so they engaged in this race to the bottom. They started to let's forego the family farm. There you see where the hog production is in North Carolina. And what you essentially see is you see the collapse of the hog family farms and the rise of these industrial things. And what tends to happen is in the 90s is when that moment occurred where you have all this Wall Street capital going into this industrial model, and there's an overproduction of the market. And that tends to be when the families, the local businesses leave the market because they can't compete on price and they don't have the capital to outlive the overproduction. This happened about 5-10 years ago with dairy. Now, what to keep in mind too is our core consumption in America is essentially flat, but we're producing more and more hogs. Why? It's mostly for export, mainly to China and Mexico. Pork is incredibly important to the Chinese diet, and so essentially we are destroying real Iowa to beat China. And as you see, like 67% of the waterways in Iowa are too polluted to go into. As I said earlier, there's a cancer crisis. For some reason, New York Times doesn't write about it. They like to write about like the fancy vegan restaurant in the moment. But thanks to Washington hosted a story recently where millennials are getting, there's a cancer crisis for millennials in Iowa. And guess what? It's not because of beer or fake baking. I mean, it's not hard to figure out what's going on here. So cargo, as I said in the Green Baron, they move between 1 and 3, 1 and 4 grains globally. You got to think of cargo as the best modern-day example of Standard Oil. Check out this. This is from one of the brochures. I love this. You're the flour in your bread, the wheat in your noodles, the salt on your fries. We're the corn in your tortillas, the chocolate in your dessert, the sweetener in your soft drink. We are the oil in your salad dressing, the beef, pork, or chicken you eat for dinner. We are the cotton in your clothing, the backing on your carpet, and the fertilizer in your viola. That's beautiful prose. Also, that is power. Put their power in context. Their average revenue in a year is equal to all the tax revenue all the states in grain. As I mentioned too, this chapter calls a Farm Bill. So the original Farm Bill, think of it like Goldilocks, is the whole bill was created because during World War I, the government asked farmers to increase production because European land was taken out of production. After the war, you have all this additional production going on that we don't need, and so you have a lot of marginal land put in production that should have been pulled out. But then the rational thing is for farmers to pull back, but they can't because they're trying to save the land because prices are low. So you see this vicious ecological destructive cycle table. The Farm Bill comes along and says, trying to stabilize markets, is you'll get subsidies. And so from the get-go, the family, they thought FDR was Marxist, evil, yada, yada, yada. Turns out actually stable markets are really good for business. The family really boomed during this time. To me, and then I focused on the 1996 Farm Bill where things went off the rails, but to me the best example of the shifting of how broken the Farm Bill has become is this stat, is for every dollar you spent to store, what a farmer gets, we're at the lowest recorded ever in American history, it's like 11 cents. After those new deal with farms, we saw more than 50 cents on the dollar. So imagine what rural America would be if 30 cents went back to these communities instead of 11. As I said earlier too, is the 1996 one is, to me, I call it the Wall Street Farm Bill. That's where you really see this Goldilocks framework flip to an overproduction framework. And what I mean by that is crop insurance is a really good way to see that. Crop insurance, most people think of like insurance for rain and stuff. It's not. It's insurance for low prices. Where 60% of the premium is paid for by taxpayers. So my personal opinion is what Congress realized is it looked bad optically to hand big checks to rich farmers. So they did it through, they hid it by doing a really highly subsidized insurance that only goes to super rich farmers doing certain crops. And so essentially it's insurance for low prices. And so, and as you see, Julie Gutman has done a lot of great work at this at UC Santa Cruz is, with Farm Bill now, we're essentially subsidizing junk goods. So corn gets subsidies, but not carrots. So now it takes money to be healthy in this country. And you see so much of the obesity crisis in this country is a structural thing. Another thing too, the thing that's been underappreciated is the beauty of a family farm is it's like a retirement portfolio. You have different things going on. So both market creators have other things. What happens is this system pushes people to do one or two things. And it makes them incredibly fragile. In this Wall Street chart, it's a little complicated to understand. Basically, what you used to see family farms used to have different things going on. It used to be you grow your own grain to feed your own animal to then sell. Now, as you grow corn, you sell it to Cargill. Cargill makes it into feed, sells it to the confinement industrial facility, who then sells it. And this is gonna be the hill I'll die on, is ethanol. I think ethanol has been one of the most destructive things in the modern American food system. And I say that as someone from Iowa whose dad's an ethanol truck driver. This is the best example of how dumb and broken the system is every year we have a record corn and soy crop. Econ 101 says grow something else if prices are low, but that is not what the system is designed to do. The system is designed for record crops, so we find dumb uses for surplus. Anyone that thinks ethanol is good for the climate in 2025 thinks the world is flat. I said that at Iowa State, and I'm so proud of myself. Here's the thing, though. Also, on top of it, the best thing you can do to lower grocery prices right now is in the ethanol mandate. You're taking the best farmland in this country and you're wasting it. You're wasting it. And on top of it, it's really contributing to the cancer crisis in Iowa because the Corn Belt's expanded in America. We took a lot of marginal land that used to be in pasture and put it in the corn. And now farmers, they're farming right up to the creek because that's what the system is pushing them to do. So you're just seeing this intensive cycle. Do I have that? On top of it, they're trying to put ethanol in the airplanes. That's what the Biden administration was trying to do. Biden's Secretary of Agriculture, his son worked for an ethanol company. And finally, by the end of this chapter is, I told you I think of Cargill like Standard Oil. I actually think a better comparison of Cargill is actually like the 19th century British Empire. The sun never sets on their empire. They're still in Russia. You don't know who they are, so they still do business with Russia. And I love this report from Oxford that was in the FT like 10 years ago, where Colombia had a civil war, a quarter million people died. And one of the things they did as a society to rebuild was London commercial land first get up. Not only did Cargill exceed that, they exceeded that London by 36 times secretly. And I say this because this is just a tiny little example of a black box book company that's incredibly powerful that we know very little about. There are more books on Cargill to my knowledge, there are 5 books on Cargill. 3 of them Cargill paid for. I'm going to show you a few barons just to kind of give you a little taste of the other ones. J.A.D. is my coffee baron. This chapter is about monopoly and history of monopoly in America. One little fact before I show you the slide, they did not sell coffee in America until 2012. They now sell more coffee than Starbucks because they bought all these brands. Wait, by the way, have you noticed most of them have gone downhill, like Panera's not good anymore? But they essentially, in business, they call this roll-up. They saw a competitive market, they threw their capital at it, they rolled it up to get a dominant market position. And the person here being hurt the most is the coffee farmer. The way used to do 25 hours for their beans, now just one signature in a family. It has a really dark Nazi past. On top of it, too, a big goal of this chapter for me when I wrote this 3 years ago was underappreciated history was how much monopolists finance fascists. You could see why I was thinking this 3 years ago. After World War II, Congress commissioned a report, how did this happen? And that was one of their findings. In particular, they went after a company called I.G. Farben. I really recommend this book on it. I.G. Farben was Hitler's largest donor. It was a chemical company. The congressional report said their donation made the dreams of ICOM come true. After the war, we broke I.G. Farben up into 7 companies. You might have heard of one today called Bayer Monsanto. This is a fun one. You guys heard of Fairlife? Young men are obsessed with protein right now. So Coke now owns this milk, but this is my dairy baron. They upgrade this brand. Think of it as, Coke owns both Minute Maid and Simply Orange Juice. Fun fact, they're both mostly imported here in Jersey, but Minute Maid's for the Walmart consumer, Simply's for the Target consumer. And when they were creating Fairlife is for the Target consumer, it's bougie milk. You pay twice the price of milk for half the volume. The quote on Coke exec. It's way more protein, way less sugar, way more has really long shelf life. You use it in that Cola Life actually is hyper used. It's pretty good. It's really lucrative for Coke. And fun fact, for the first time in 40 years, milk consumption in America went up last year. There's a whole, I'm sure someone's working on a dissertation about young men and protein right now. Cottage cheese sales really up. I call it the Joe Rogan diet. But here's the thing, my dairy variant, they learned from Iowa. They saw what happened to Iowa in the 90s, and they're like, we're not going down with that. We need a branded product to survive. In all of my variants too, there is a degree of business brilliance to each one of them they could have to admire. So my dairy variant is, they own Frerick Farms. If anyone's from Chicago, have done that drive from Chicago to Indianapolis and might passed it, they were able to, the reason why they're based there is they bought 20,000 acres of farmland at once, which is really hard to do. And the reason why they did it was for the Chicagoans in the room. That was supposed to be a third Chicago airport. It never panned out. Here's the thing though, when I was driving around, this is why I'm a big believer, you can read something but you have to go see something. I was driving around the cornfields and I saw canals everywhere. I'd never seen canals in the Midwest, around cornfields. I was like, what's going on here? Turns out this used to be known as Everglades of the North. Teddy goats used to go hunting here. Basically, Lake Michigan historically used to overflow into this area. If you ever fly into Midway Airport, you'll notice all the little potholes south of Lake Michigan. That's what that is. It's a wetland area. This land was essentially drained and put in crop production. So first of all, you probably shouldn't even be doing crops here, let alone cows. Pigs defecate a lot, cows defecate way more. Cows defecate, it's like 65 pounds a day. So this operation has 30,000 cows. Those cows produce as much manure in a day as the city of Austin, Texas. You could tour their farm, and what they realized is there was a big public backlash to industrial hog facilities, so they wanted to get ahead of the narrative. My dairy variants have always been obsessed with getting ahead of the narrative. So you can tour it, the whole complex. It's one of the largest tourist attractions in the state of Indiana. There's a housing, Marriott Hotel right next door that you can't see. There's a milk cart climbing wall, there's like a whole museum. You board buses to tour the facilities right there. So this whole chapter, this is the nerdiest chapter in the book because I am determined for you to understand what these things are because they control the conversation over the food system in America. Until we fix this, I don't think you can change things. These are called checkoffs. We go back to the New Deal. Farmers used to check a box, you pay a tax into a pot of money to advertise their good. Got more milk is the most famous one. Most of them don't matter. There's like 23 of them. They're the things that the state fairly give you a free egg. Here's the thing. In the 80s, they started change, and meat and dairy are the ones that matter. As our farm bill shifted from an overproduction, what checkoffs did is essentially they're trying to stimulate additional demand. How do they get you to eat more cheese? And here's the thing. There's two things going on here that are really concerning. One, vertical integration. The largest owner of hogs in America is WH Group of China. They own 1 in 4, 1 in 5 pounds. They also are the largest butcher of hogs. So the voice of the pork checkoff in America is really the voice of a Chinese multinational. So what's supposed to help farmers is actually the voice of the corporation. On top of it, there's so much money in these pots that very little oversight's occurring, especially dairy. Collectively, there's about $1 billion here a year. Dairy alone is like 600 million, 700 million a year. And there's no oversight. There are so many GAO, Inspector General reports just saying how little oversight there is. And this to me too is what finances the revolving door USDA. And I think the best example was Biden's Secretary of Agriculture, Tom Vilsack, and also Obama's. And between administrations, he made $1 million a year working as a checkoff lobbyist for dairy. And his job was for the dairy heads in the room, if there are any. Because Canada has a supply management system for dairy. We're trying to manage their dairy system. His job was to gut it so we can dump our surplus milk in Canada. I say all this because my dairy variant first hated the checkoffs. So think it, you're trying to make a fancy milk. Your competition is normal milk. So what he did is secretly finance lawsuits that went all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court to get out the checkoff. Why should I be mandated to pay a tax into something that's my competition? He lost those lawsuits. He seemingly even, I would argue, got into bed with the checkoff. So you see this little thing? This was paid for by checkoff, Mike partly. So this whole thing right here is advertising a production model driving the family dairy farmer that's bankruptcy. So he's taking money from dairy farmers and using it against them. On top of it, Fairlife, he got money from checkoff to essentially make this privately owned product. But the most concerning thing to me that the checkoffs are, it's financing so much junk science and agriculture. Cows on land, when they defecate, she's fertilizing her feed. When you put them inside these manure facilities, first of all, you need fossil fuels to grow their feed, but on top of it, you create additional methane gas because when you pull manure, it creates more. So this is even more destructive for the climate. My dairy barons realized it. So they essentially helped finance a bunch of the junk science. All these manure digesters you see, a lot of this comes out of the junk science from these channels. Let's skip that. On top of it, so Fairlife, you might have heard of them in the media just because they had famous animal welfare abuse scandals. Keep in mind, like, the cows aren't happy in this environment. It's mostly undocumented men. They run these operations. And the thing to keep in mind, dairy is very different where most of these hog facilities are largely automated. Corn comes out the ceiling, hogs stand there all day, and they just eat, defecate. Dairy's labor intensive. So what tends to happen in these rural communities is no one wants to live near these things because they smell awful. So I think of the most dairy farmers now are basically feudal lords. They buy a lot of these homes and they're cheap and they put them in the homes. So there's been reports that this American life that you'll have 12 young men building 2-bedroom trailers. So they're also the largest employers in these counties. So they're both the employer and the landlord for the undocumented young men. So you're just asking for power uses. On top of it, I discovered is my dairy barons claim residency at the Ritz-Carlton in Puerto Rico. My hunch is if you live in Puerto Rico for more than 6 months a year, you don't pay capital income taxes. Well, don't forget they recently sold their lot to Coca-Cola. Just going back to the whole cosplay thing is like you know the show Dirty Jobs? My dairy barons have been on it. They always like to pretend like they're hardworking, but that's not usually the case. On top of it too is like going through OSHA records I discovered. Keep in mind this is the largest tourist attraction, one of the largest in the state of Indiana. It's never been recorded that a worker died. He got stuck into one of those digesters. Almost like a horror film. And this worker had 3 children. And they think it was a $10,000 fine for that harassment. And this to me shows you the state of media. It's like media and outside. The only newspapers that exist in this country now are in elite white cities. In the middle of the country, elite media essentially died. And what the scary thing about checkoffs is checkoffs essentially pay for all the news now. So most of the agriculture news you're reading now in this country is junk because it's paid for by industry, but it's party press. So this was never reported. Normally this would have been reported. Driscoll's real quick. Driscoll's my dairy baron. You know I talked about chicken earlier? They do the same thing. They sell 1 in 3 berries, but they don't grow a single berry. They contract out production. This whole chapter 2 is about the offshoring of produce in America. 40% of your veggies, 60% of your fruit is now offshore. They kind of like how manufacturing went off. You ship production offshore because you can then abuse labor and environment and no one can pay attention to it. It's also why a lot of produce tastes really bad now. This produce is engineered for durability, not taste. Also, when it varies come from Argentina, it's just not, first thing all the gas you're spending to get it here. Our mess stuff. JDS Foods is my slaughtering baron. They're the largest meat packer the world's ever seen. They now own all the brands. Saw you 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. If you notice, you don't see their name on a single brand. It's that illusion of choice. I'm awful to the grocery store with because I love telling people who owns what. But that is what's happening. This is a wild chapter too. They basically bribed their way to monopoly level status. They bribed over 1,800 Brazilian politicians, including, I'm not talking like campaign contributions, I'm talking like they gave a Manhattan apartment to a politician. They got cheap capital from the Brazilian bank to then essentially buy a bunch of companies. Cisco, as I mentioned earlier, that's my distribution baron. This chapter partly is the way our antitrust laws in our Philip right now, I think one of the biggest loopholes is you only pay attention when a big buys a big. So what they did is they essentially, Cisco does compete at BOZ. To my calculations, they bought over 260 companies. But they're buying little things. They're buying like a seafood thing in Miami. They're buying like hotel distributor, those little like hotel soaps in Alaska. They buy the little things that fly under the radar. The American stopped once when they were trying to buy U.S. foods. Since they were told to stop, they bought another 36 company. And every year they buy 3 or 4. But this means is, and their dominance is actually the biggest in rural America. So if you're a rural American restaurant, you really don't have one choice. And that's why a lot of the tenant end. Because Cisco, what I realized is big likes to run with big. Cisco wants a barrier there. They want one company that can do all of its like 100-some warehouses across America. They don't want to deal with local food. So if you're a local beef person, a local restaurant, local whatever, it's hard to break into. You can't essentially break into these things. It's also kind of why when you go grocery shopping, if you notice, not really seeing anything new. You're just seeing like a new flavor of Oreo. That's partly why is you can't break in. Walmart. So if I had at my table with them, Walmart is the king of kings. Here's why. So Walmart also owns Sam's Club. So when you put the market share together, Walmart is it sells 1 in 3 groceries in America. That's the same market share as the 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th need combined. They're the largest private employer in America. They're the world's richest family. They own 2 NFL teams. I think the most powerful person in America in the food system is a Walmart buyer. I think they're the closest example this country's ever had to a Soviet Union-style Politburo. I almost called this chapter that was like too nerdy. It's a applying commitment. You do not negotiate with Walmart. Walmart dictates terms to you. Everything I've written about, this is the chapter people reach out to me the most, is suppliers are just, Walmart, they just get confused by Walmart. And the other thing too is like there's a whole game too, and I talk about this in this chapter of this guy, former Whole Foods VP, called it mafioso capitalism. There's a whole pay-to-play going on in the grocery store. So when you see we have all these soup options, is eye levels everything. Walmart doesn't do this. Other grocery stores do is you buy shelf space. There's a whole, they call it slotting fees. Here's the thing, Walmart doesn't do it, but Walmart, there's a whole thing now, Walmart and Amazon, where they're getting into, they're like, you know what you see sponsored by when you search online? It's the same thing. It's pay to play. It's about eye level. It's about placement. Walmart just bought Vizio, the TV maker. Why would Walmart buy TV? It's because when you stream now, you get commercials, and Walmart wants to essentially own that. So if you're Campbell's, if you buy ads on Walmart on Vizio, we shouldn't be shocked if you assume you get good placement because you're buying ads on Walmart TV. So where do we go from here? So my whole book intellectually is what neoliberalism did to the food system. Laissez-faire, pick your word. But I think you have to understand how you got somewhere in order to figure out where you go from here. My biggest thing is put animals back in the land. Because there's only so many cows on pasture one person to look after. You're restoring that middle class farm. Because here's the thing, most row crops will be robotic soon, and that's not a bad thing. You're seeing, here's the thing too, we're coming to a fork in the road. Ethanol's gonna die, thank God. Cars move to hybrids and EVs. What are we gonna do with those markets, with all that farming that's gonna come available? That is my goal, is to put animals back on the land. The second one is bright line rules. Knowing that the goal of any corporate executive is monopoly, how do you essentially stop market consolidation? For example, Iowa has a law in books, we don't enforce it. You could do it federally, where it's called a packer ban. It says if you're a corporation, you can't own animals. That stops, basically, you break up most of the meat companies in America because most meat companies now own animals. It's a hard line goal. You're essentially trying to stop vertical integration. Another one that used to have in America was that slaughterhouses keeping the retail business. Here's the thing. Have you heard of Wild Fork? You might have seen them on, it's like a meat store. I'm JBS Barron owns, there's a few of them in Jersey. Or the other one is Walmart, actually is now in the beef industry. Walmart was sick of being gouged by the beef pack, by the slaughtering dairy. So Walmart just opened its own beef facility now in Wichita, and soon the same thing in dairy. So I actually enjoy thinking this way, is how do you essentially stop vertical integration? Well, horizontally, you could do something simple as to, like Cisco. Once you're so big, you're not allowed to buy a company. Because no company buys another company for pro-competitive reasons. Amy Klobuchar Senator Klobuchar has worked on legislation in that vein. The third one is, and this is what can be done here locally, is institutional buyers. As you phase out this old system, you've got to help stabilize and build up the economies of scale. Maybe, guess what? Schools buy a lot. And here's a really cool example in Wisconsin. Anyone from Ingo last year? Okay, I was in the Dells. I was presenting Wisconsin farmers last year, and I found this out. Like, there's a lot of really cool indigenous stuff going on in Wisconsin right now. And what they're doing locally is, historically, we used to dump surplus cheese and food on Native American tribes. What we're trying to do now is essentially buying from local indigenous farmers, give to local indigenous people. So first of all, that's institutional buying. Like, you really help build enough. You do it slowly. You're seeing them go for 7 default drives. How do we essentially do that where we do it locally? Another one too is this, what I'm working on right now is rethinking the farm bill. I want to essentially move to, I call it stewardship payments. I want to subsidize farm practices, not crops. So essentially say, here's a bunch of pot of money, you can do cover crops, you can buffer strips, whatever's best for your land, you will get paid if you do this, you decide what's best, but I don't like how they're picking favorites right now. And this is what I'm kind of toying with right now, playing with. There's a really good journal, academic piece recently in the Journal of Pleasant Studies, where meat's really confusing, where most meat companies in America are foreign owned, but they're also not, they're state-backed monopolies. Because proteins are so important to political stability. So you essentially, I don't want you to feel sorry for Tyson's chicken. Like Tyson's not even competing on a level playing field against state-backed monopolies. What I've been kind of playing with is historically in America, we used to have laws. If you own a TV or radio station, you got to be American. That laws basically were junked because of a guy named Robert Murdoch. But thinking how we get back some that way kind of the food system, like local ownership. The other one to think about is rethinking USDA. So for November, I used to say we should junk USDA data, you know. But thinking, and some of these to work at a DC agency is nothing scares an agency where we try to take away some of their budget. And like for example, in America, the Federal Trade Commission oversees the antitrust authority over every market except meat. USDA has a carve out. We should maybe take, and there's a great article by Eric Dundas at Temple, I believe. There's all this hidden antitrust power in government that has been used. Maybe we should take that power away from USDA and give it to the Federal Trade Commission. Because it's clear that USDA is not executing its ability here. The seventh one is journalists are your best friends. In two different ways to look at this. Here's an example of an article. I was talking to a baker in Western Iowa last summer, and I heard about this great program where it controlled the deer population. Hunters are essentially, if they donate their buck to a local meat locker, the state will pay for it to be processed and be handed out free at food pantries. What a great program. Here's the thing. No one was testing for lead bullets, no lead meat. So I told this reporter, Nina did a great piece where she looked at every single state, only Minnesota right now is testing. Here's a more graphic example. You know the movie Fargo? You know the mulch scene at the end? Some confinement owner in Iowa was taking their dumpsters and throwing the dead pigs into like a wood chipper and throwing the pieces out into the field. That's illegal. This older woman in Iowa was driving one day and just saw a hog leg on the side of the road. She reported it to DNR, and the DNR didn't do anything. So you know what she did? She emailed the local TV station in Omaha. Guess what? Something was finally done. That is the power at this moment, is see something, say something. Most journalists are moving a mile a minute. They don't have the time. Let them know. Or even if you see an article, you don't like how they framed it or they quoted it, which is like my relationship with the New York Times right now with food. But don't get mad on Twitter. That doesn't do anything. Send a nice email. Hey, you should really talk to this person. Or you should really know about this cool thing going on. Here's an example of like something really cool. The water's getting so bad in Iowa, what the industry is doing is essentially trying to stop the measurement of how bad the water is. So a group of rural people in southwest Iowa are essentially, with their own money and time, are measuring the water quality. And I just thought the journalists know, I'm like, this is really cool. This is people fighting back. And I also feel like people crave those stories right now. The other thing too is, and I really encourage all the students in the room, research and write about this stuff. What should a well-regulated meat market look like? Like take dairy. Our dairy program in America, so here's a level, it's written in the 1920s. It was written before we had refrigeration. It's incredibly complicated. The joke in the dairy world is only 5 people understand the dairy program in America and 4 of them are dead. Let's not try to make 1920 laws work in 2025 and let's think about new regulatory frameworks. I think it's really fun. And here's a great article a lawsuit I wrote a few years ago where UAV only has one grocery store and it's awful. And that really was the genesis for an academic paper for her. And she just kind of built these anti-competitive land acquisition things going on. What you're seeing now is a lot of cities are realizing, like there's, like Seattle, I think just did this last month, where they're panicking and essentially you can't do this. You know, when the store closes, you have to let someone else come in. So I want to finish with this bill just because it isn't my vision for the American food system. And I say this because what I realize is so much of what we're talking about fixing the food system is actually incredibly traditional. It is radical what we have now. It is radical that one man in Iowa does 5 million hogs. And it's also, what I love about this too is it's really rooted in labor. 1 in 10, 1 in 11 Americans work in the food system. like people that met my mom and dad. My mom ran a bakery for a long time. My dad was a truck driver. Once you start freeing food in a labor context, that to me is how you make really meaningful reforms. So on that note, thank you guys so much, and I'm happy to answer any questions you have right now. Sorry for also talking on my own minutes. Question back?
Hi, thank you so much for doing this. I wanted to know what your response is to the contention that, and maybe it's part of industrial, like captured science and whatever, but wanted to know your response to the contention that industrial agriculture is necessary to reduce agricultural emissions.
Say that, Martha.
Though your response to the contention that industrial agriculture, like large-scale food processing, is necessary actually to reduce greenhouse gas emissions.
So that's a thing you're seeing like really percolate up right now, that kind of thought. I just don't agree with that. So there's a book going around right now saying we need to. If you're talking about Michael Greenwald's book.
I've heard about that. I actually started the book.
So
You actually gave a talk here about that.
Okay. First, so the whole argument in the book is let's intensify our industrial production regions in certain areas so we can free wild land. First of all, it doesn't happen. What happens is you get dumb things like ethanol, because they're not going to take that land out of production. You're also intensifying the really destructive worst parts of it. And for me, I really hate that the most because I hate industrial animal production things. First of all, you're playing Russian roulette with disease. So in China, they actually build the hog things are 10 stories tall. These animals are all genetically similar. You're going to get a COVID out of that. And on top of it, in China now, they lock workers inside because they know there's so much disease. I like to push down production because you want deconcentrated systems are just more stable. They are more like the beauty of diversity is the resilience the system creates. I don't like that intensification. Also, like so much. You got to be careful how you frame this to most Americans. Is everything you eat is always subsidized. The question is to what degree. You want to we need to shift our diets to the climate crisis. Like that's very clear. You do know, wait, let's make produce really cheap so you see a natural shifting occur. And you're actually seeing that right now with meat. McDonald's sells more chicken than beef now. You're seeing people move from beef to chicken because of that. The comparison I would make in my head is actually really Thanksgiving. Growing up for me, Thanksgiving was like the weird pilgrim thing. That's all gone. You know what I mean? We don't think of the pilgrims anymore on Thanksgiving, but that didn't trigger a backlash. How do you essentially move to a system that we need for the food, for the climate crisis in a way that you don't trigger a backlash? But I don't like the. You do need there's beauty and efficiency scales. I get that, but I don't like. Let's do more industrialization. And I say that, and I think because I'm from Iowa, of how destructive that is someone's gonna have to live next to one of those manure factories, and you're just. What it does is. What it does, I mean, think of like, this has been an underappreciated thing is, and there's been like, I think there's Porkopolis is a good book on this, what it does to the worker inside those facilities. You're dealing with like, the whole trauma of the animal. Like, with the worker, the trauma they feel in there, like, there's like two things going on with trauma. First of all, the animal feels trauma. So when we eat them, they like, I'm not a scientist, but you're seeing some literature here where pigs are unhappy inside these facilities. So it's impacting their taste. It's kind of, there's weird trauma the pig feels, but then the worker too. Imagine what it is where it used to be. If you ever talk to a dairy farmer, you notice it the most. Dairy farmers view their cows like a dog. They know the personalities, they know that. They have an intimate relationship, like a stewardship in this. When you go to this industrial model, it strips everyone of that. And I just want to get away from this whole like cell mind thinking. Like that kind of how it's weird. I would compare it to restaurants. No one opens a restaurant to make money. You do it because you want it. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm Tim Serchier, and that book was largely written about my work.
Which book?
We Are Eating the Earth, Michael Frerick. So let me challenge you. I think you're definitely, we've seen a lot of monopolization power, and there are all kinds of these challenges. But I think you mix up, I would challenge you of mixing up causes and effects on many things. So for example, I've fought subsidies my whole life, but if you actually count it, the effect of the corn subsidy is maybe 2 to 4% of the final price of meat. Meanwhile, chicken became 50% more efficient since the 1970s. because of fee laws, and that lowered the price. And meanwhile, we do subsidize, actually, we have huge subsidies for vegetables in the U.S., the water subsidies. So it's not that whenever you have a problem, if you think that this is a result of market power, you're missing the gigantic technological changes that have led to this. Virtually full pork production also.
So you're defending sharecropping right now?
I'm sorry? No,
Defending
I'm
sharecropping?
telling you what you have to deal with if you're going to deal with the causes. It's not what
Chicken dropped in price because of sharecropping. Let's be very clear why it's cheap. It's because those farmers live in poverty, utter poverty. And if you want, like, I don't want sharecropping. I think it's 2020, the 21st century. This practice should be banned.
Yeah, but the reason chicken is so cheap today is mainly because of technological change, and it has problems as well as no benefits. But if you think that it's because of monopoly power, that would be inaccurate.
The largest donor at Trump's inauguration was JBS. That is monopoly power. The first Trump that they did at USA was Phil.
Well, but if
You cannot be ignorant to capital.
obviously you can simultaneously add a great deal of market power, and the fact that things that are causing changes are also technology changes. All around the world, chicken and pork are basically raised now recently. Dairy is also 50% more feed efficient. And that's what drives these huge economies of scale. Similarly, you point out, and I 100% agree with you on ethanol, but you point out the change in the price of pork. Well, during that time, the price of grain doubled because of ethanol. So what you're seeing in the pork price is the ethanol price. So there are multiple things. You have to distinguish between all of the bans, including many of the things you've talked about, and the fact that there is a monopolization of power and all these other things, but that doesn't mean they're the causes of these things. If you were to try to produce all of the meat in the U.S. on grazing land, you'd need multiple
I
times.
think you're missing my point. We should have a less wheat diet.
Well, that's absolutely true, and that book talks enormously about it. And the question is, how do you get a reduction in meat diet? Now, 2/3 of the people in the world eat almost no meat. And as they get a little richer, there are going to be huge increases in demand. And every country where incomes have risen, people have consumed. They keep a quarter of our meat. So if you want to solve that problem, it's not going to be this way. You're going to have to solve it by inventing plant-based products that people find equivalent.
They didn't take in the marketplace. I mean, so let's back up, and you and I fundamentally agree on how we socialize power. So I'm in the neo-brain desk camp. There's a massive battle going on right now in antitrust to how we view power. I do not think you can do anything until you do trust busting first. If you don't do trust busting, any regulatory reforms will be unwound. Look at 2008. They didn't break up the banks. And all the regulation, most of the regulation of banks is done unwound because you didn't deal with unchecked corporate power. That to me is the key issue of this moment.
Well, I agree with that there's a lot of corporate power message to outlook. However, the fundamental problem is that they produce and use 50% of the fruit in the next 40 years because rising population and rising EP consumption. And agriculture is incredibly harmful automatic. And grazing land, you're going to produce dramatically more methane, use dramatically more land, clearing an area the size of England every year through cropland expansion, mostly in tropical forests. And so there are multiple things. So I endorse your challenge to the accumulation of power, and I think you're right about the antitrust problems associated with that, and Kearns feeds on some of the political feedback. But to explain all of these phenomena as simply the result of that kind of conspiracy misses the fact that there are gigantic technological and economic changes due to simple huge rise in demand for food.
So I don't understand your argument. So what's your critique?
Your solutions are not accurate. So you should break
We
up
should
the
have
power.
sharecropping. We think animals be in metal sheds all day.
If you try to produce even a fraction of the meat that Americans consume on grazing land, you would need 2 or 3 times the continental U.S. That's just the reality.
You're using the finite point of what we like to eat changes by the day. 1 year it's kale, 1 year it's broccoli, 1 year it's chicken. I don't care about that. I rather create the regulatory structures that are good for the environment and let the consumer decide. The price will reflect that.
Yeah. Well,
That is like, at my core, reject industrial meat production.
Yeah, well,
Because I've
do that.
seen what it does, and I've seen why this country's dancing around the moment, and I see the cruelty to both the labor part and also the animal part. And that is not something I'm kosher with. Like, that is something I fundamentally in the core don't agree with. And I really think I just think the sharecropping of all, like that's why chicken has been so good. Is because
Regulate CAFOs and do them better, but you also, if you want to have a serious reduction in that, you're going to have plant-based meats such as commercial meats. Otherwise, people will consume these days, and that's proof in the world. So to be realistic about it.
people respond to price. People, like, everyone's eating chicken. You look at, I went for a whole book on chain restaurants because I love chain restaurants. Chicken's doing blockbuster numbers right now. For the life of me, I do not understand why Raising Cane's is so hot, but people love Raising Cane's. And that's because of price. If you shift the subsidy model to vegetables, people are going to go where the prices are. They're going to move away from pop to juice. They're going to whatever. This is just where we fundamentally disagree. Any other questions?
I just kind of related to Tim's point. So I recently met with someone who's working on growing milk using fungus. And right now this has become a big thing. They're using it in a lot of powdered milk products. So what role do you see for this kind of, upcoming technology, whether it's, fungus-grown milk or plant-based meats? Do you think that's going to replace, a significant portion of the meat and dairy that we're consuming now in our diets?
I have no clue. I mean, that's the beauty of innovation, is you let fund it, see what happens, let the marketplace decide. I mean, you've seen that Beyond Burgers just collapsed. It collapsed in the marketplace. It just didn't hit. I mean, there's various reasons why, subsidy, why, price points. But I just be careful that, my whole book, too, is I'm rejecting the Michael Pollan framework. You don't change systems with your fork. We have fake milk. It only has 10% market share. And guess what? Industrial milk production's gotten even more evil since. We didn't change the structures, so nothing changed. So we can think of alternative consumption, but that won't change the systems. So yes, you can have that, but you have to essentially you have to walk and chew gum at the same time. You need to attack the structural things, the monopolies and the systems, so you can allow beautiful new things to be created, to grow. But if you don't have a power framework, the other one will be stuck, will die in the grave. I mean, I date at JBS all the time. I tell libertarians this all the time. This is a company that employs middle schoolers in America in slaughterhouses. They're not going to give you an ounce of market share if you threaten the bottom line. And you are naive if you think so. I mean, they've been accused of bribing meat inspectors. Reuters reported last month they're using slave labor in their chicken production. So just like that is like where I look at is like, I want that innovation, but how do we create an environment so that innovation can occur? Yeah.
I don't know if you know the answer to this, but all of your work on these barons, and thank you for this amazing book outlet for your book. Did you get any sense whether they're hitting diminishing returns in their profits? I mean, are they getting so big that they're just having to go to worse and worse practices to get eating Italians to care, or are they really still getting 4%, 5% growth in their profit?
It's not visibly profitable. JBS is like having a phenomenal quarter right now. I also think here's the thing, they keep making they're buying another industry because they have so much additional capital, so that reinforces their dominance. I think of like Walmart. Like when Walmart came to town, you didn't buy them on milk, you shifted your consumption. It's incredibly lucrative.
Everything that goes is fundamentally the kind of boards that doesn't know the word and if nobody does. How can you use that spur capital?
I mean, that is like, there's so much of the food system in America, so you just realize how dumb it is. Like so much of our produce comes out of the Imperial Valley. I go back to my purgatory folder. I had a whole conversation over California water, but I realized berry production's only on the coast, which is its own water issues. But like so much, because of the water, we need to really shift different production systems. I mean, that's the beauty. If you ever have time, there's the agricultural census. America does every 7 years. Beautiful historical reports. And you realize how regional production used to be in America. How does we get back to that system? There's a reason why a lot of eggs for New York City was done in this area. You go up to the Champaign Valley, the dairy, but New York City used to have these kind of things going on because of water. Also, diets differ in America. I mean, that's part of the conversation. I was on Bloomberg's Odd Lots podcast last week talking about Cisco. It was the homogenization of American food. Not only does it taste but it just doesn't make sense. Like you're probably going to naturally eat more pork in Iowa than seafood on the East Coast. But it's about water. It's about like what can you grow in these resources. But then the amount of like produce being done in the desert now just doesn't make sense. And it's going to have to shift. I mean, that is what keeps me going is you just know a moment of reckoning is coming. And so for me, that's why you create people learn to, like, students learn to write about it. You know, I mean, it's so clear we're living in 1857 right now with the stock market. What is that new regulatory framework going to be? How do we shift? What should these things bring? It just doesn't make sense to the water. I think that's such a good point. Because even like the waterways in Iowa too, it's like the waterways are this industrial hog facilities, but they're just so much hog shit in the water mixed with all the chemicals for ethanol production.
Okay, we should end it there on the hard food.
So if you're interested in these sorts of topics, check out the Princeton Food Project website. We try to keep track of all the courses, like Professor Serkinger's and others that are discussing these issues. We also have events of our own. Thanks to C-PREE, thanks to Kiwi, and thanks to you.